Hey, Eric, can you hear me? Are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Hi there. I was looking back. Are you all set with your slides?
Yeah, I'm all set. So I've got them up on my screen here. So as long as I'll be able to share my screen when the time comes, I'll be good.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
And they all got the handouts that I emailed you?
Yes, I forwarded those to the committee.
Perfect, thank you.
Let me just confirm Eric.
How you doing? Is it hot there too?
It is. I just went out and took a short walk.
I did the same. I went out to cut the grass in between the one this morning and here, and I'll tell you, I regret it.
Well, yeah, you don't regret it in January.
Yeah. Although it's easier, I went out and because the front lawn is not that big. So I went out and bought an electric mower, and it's an Echo. Wow, what a wonderful machine.
Yeah, I think that's the next one kind of I want to get. They look really good and efficient.
Well, it's light, and you know, I've had for the push type, I've always had the Hondas, and they're very heavy, but they're good machine.
Yeah.
But the Echo is light, and if you're older like I am, and your shoulder is a bum shoulder, you need a lighter machine. Yeah. Oh,
Hey, Val, Jordan.
Afternoon.
good
It
afternoon.
is. After a tough week.
Yeah. Oh.
Thanks, Jordan. Beat me to it. There's Jane. Jane, we lost your background. Or is that a new background? Afternoon, Chris.
We had an interesting discussion this morning regarding SWEP. And it's
Yeah, I'm sorry I had a conflict. I couldn't join the
Yeah.
fiscal policy group this morning.
Yeah, I had a county meeting first and then joined in at 10, but we're going to have a separate day allocated to SWEP. There's so many issues.
I'm not surprised. Yeah, I would think. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a hot topic.
Hey, Dave.
Hey, how you doing,
Erica,
Bruce?
welcome.
Yeah, and I think we talked about. I just caught the tail end of the conversation there, and I think we're going to. I'll work with you, Bruce, on setting up a SWEP day.
Yep.
Whether we do that commission or fiscal policy, might be good commission.
It seems like that. It seems like it. Yeah.
It's such a big topic,
Yeah.
and we could get a few experts from some different perspectives, on that. So
Good. Good.
Great.
That'd be great.
Let's see, has Jay come on yet?
No, we're waiting for
Okay,
Jay.
well, I see Jesse's coming on. Did we get the final back from Ron?
Yes, there was one. I sent it back to him one more time. Sarah had raised a tiny little editorial point. So I sent it to Ron, but that was now 2 days ago. So
Okay.
I assume Ron is swamped. I'll push that again so we
Okay.
can get that off of our to-do list.
Okay,
It really is. We know it's all in place. We just have to get the final version in
Right.
front of everybody. There's Jay. And let's see. And we've got a number of folks visiting and listening in today and watching. So that's good. Welcome to the members of the public. And let's see, there's Barbara. I believe that's it for our group.
I'm here.
Oh, Bill, what about Bill? We heard from Bill?
I have not. Hi, Erica.
How are you doing? Hello.
Hi. Been a while since I'd seen you. Oh, poof.
Yeah, so my background seems to be cutting my head off periodically. So
Don't lose it.
Are you drowning in the lake? Is that what's going on?
I wish.
And Eric's here too. Eric, your background is kind of shading your. But hi, nice to see you again.
How are you? Yeah, I have the same problem. It cuts my head off every once in a while.
Yeah.
Let's
But I've
see,
got to promote CTE whenever I can.
Jay, before you start us, I just want to confirm with Erica and Kelly, are you both set with slides and able to share slides?
Let's see if I can share. You have to, host needs to allow us to share.
Jordan's doing that as we speak.
Right.
And Kelly, are you set with slides?
I am getting the same message.
David, I was working on bill.
What's that?
I was working on the bill,
Oh, the big one.
the omnibus bill.
Jeez, Jay.
Making sure that manifest hardship is in there.
That's good.
Yeah.
There's something good coming out of that.
See, Rick, I had your back on that one. So
What is it,
Thanks
filled
for-
with criminal justice stuff?
No.
what's that?
His omnibus bill, you know.
All right,
Is it-
Erica and Kelly, you should be good now for sharing.
Yeah. Isn't the omnibus behind Eric?
Yep.
Oh, a different type of bus. Okay.
Good now.
Well, omnibus, the bus is everywhere, the CTE bus, right?
Absolutely. All over the house.
Bruce, I can share my slides.
Okay,
Are we ready to roll? Okay.
I believe so. We're just missing Bill, and I assume he'll catch up with us.
Righto. We'll do introductions of everybody, but let me just do the call of attendance. This meeting is being recorded. We do have guests, and as posted on the Senate calendar and House calendar, there is a dial-in number to the Carsey Institute should anybody have difficulties connecting to or maintaining their connection. With that, I'd like to call a roll on the Adequacy and Distribution Work Group of the School Funding Commission. So I see Chris Dwyer here. Please introduce and that you're where you are.
Chris Dwyer in Portsmouth, and I am by myself.
Thank you, Chris. Jane Bergeron-Bolio.
Jane Bergeron, I'm here at home by myself in Waterville Valley.
Thank you, Jane. Hi. And Val Zanchuk.
Val Zanchuk is home alone in Concord.
Thank you. I see Iris.
Hi, I'm at my house in Barrington, and my daughter and husband are elsewhere, somewhere around, but not with me.
Thank you. Barbara.
Barbara Tremblay at my home in Keene. My husband is outside.
I'm Jay Kahn in Keene as well. At home, my wife is someplace nearby, but not present with me. And Bill Ardinger, not with us currently. With the other members of the commission, just go around and introduce yourselves. Rick, see you up
I'm
there.
Rick Ladd. I'm here alone in Haverhill.
David.
Dave Luno, here at reporting from Hopkinton with Ozzy the long-haired dachshund.
Dick.
And I'm Dick Ames. I'm in Jaffrey alone.
And could our AIR guests join us, our colleagues?
Certainly. This is Jesse Levin. I'm here in Pacifica, California, just south of San Francisco. My two sons and wife are upstairs, and two puppies are upstairs, and I'm down in the basement all alone.
Yeah, it is full. And
Hey, I'm Drew Atchison. I'm in Washington, D.C. have a few people at home, but not in the room with me at the moment.
Thank you. Eric, maybe you introduce yourself. I know we'll come back to you later.
Sure. Eric Froworth with the Department of Education, and I'm home in Manchester, and my dogs may wander through at some point.
All right. Bruce, you wanna...
Yep, Bruce Mallory from the Carsey School, home in my office alone in Cary Point, Maine.
And are you driving us today?
Oh, sure, we'll drive together, but I'll be happy to help. Yeah.
Jordan, right below me. There he is. Yeah.
Yep.
Hey, Jordan Hensley, also with the Carsey School here in Dover.
Thanks, Jordan. And now we have our guests who are both experts in facets of our early childhood care delivery systems.
Jay, we're in behavioral health today, actually.
Oh, well, it's close.
It's close.
So we have only HHS representatives with us.
And DOE.
Kelly, I'm not familiar with you, so you've got me guessing. What is your role with HHS?
Hello, my name is Kelly Untitled. I actually work for the Department of Education in the Office of Social and Emotional Wellness. I am currently, if you care to know, at home in Alexandria with my 5-year-old and 9-year-old. So if I jump out of screen while I'm not talking, I will come back.
Thank you. Okay, so I had the guests and the both offices were here. Just had the topic off. Okay, but Erica.
Hi, everybody. I'm Erica Ungarelli. I am the Director for Children's Behavioral Health at the Department of Health and Human Services. I am here at home in Concord with a couple of family members who are downstairs in the basement with my dogs. So hopefully it'll be quiet.
Great, great. And let's see, we have allocated how many minutes to this, Bruce? Are we in 30 minutes on this, or?
Well, about 45 minutes for Erica and Kelly, and then another 20 or 30 minutes for Eric, so we can get a full picture of all those program areas as they bear on the kinds of questions that we're asking ourselves these days about adequacy.
Right. And so as a bit of background, school funding commissions met for a few months now. We have our consultants on board. Part of our task is to develop an adequacy definition and then determine the equity relative to the opportunities available to the children of our state for an adequate education. Early childhood is, behavioral health is one of those areas that we know the legislatures had some attention to it. And you can not only reflect on the current statutes and the obligations that there are for school districts to meet behavioral health needs of its students, but also forecast for us where that puck may be moving as you think about, and you've had conversations with folks about where we might be with the start of the school year in the fall. So looking forward to some presentation, I assume, and then we can cover some question answers. Thank you.
So thanks, I'll say thanks to Erica and Kelly for agreeing to come on today, and also for being flexible about this rolling schedule. I think I first contacted them in January and said, we'd love to have you come speak to us. And we hit a few speed bumps along the way, but here we are. As I've asked Erica to start, I know that the two of them have sort of coordinated their presentation so they can kind of tag team this. And I've asked them each to take maybe 20 minutes at the most for a presentation and leave some time for Q&A after that. And then by around 4 o'clock, we'll switch to a focus on career and tech ed with Eric. So Erica.
Great, thanks, Bruce. Let me share my screen. My presentation, if I can find it. Just a moment. I have two screens going at the moment, so I have to.
Makes us all crazy. I do too.
Makes us crazy. Hang
Forget who I'm
on.
looking at.
There we go. Is everybody seeing my PowerPoint at this point?
Got it.
Great. Okay. So what I'm going to talk about, as I said, I am the director for children's behavioral health at the department. And what I'm going to do is talk about the behavioral health system in New Hampshire for children as it is today, what we hope it will be in the future, and how that does today and can in the future connect with students and school, and how that can be of an asset, and where the gaps may be for schools, even as we move forward, and a little bit about Medicaid to schools and things like that. So just a little bit of background for those who don't know. The Division of Behavioral Health, your children's behavioral health is settled in the Division for Behavioral Health at the department. There are 3 major bureaus within the division, of which Children's Behavioral Health is one. Bureau of Mental Health Services, who serves adults with severe mental illness, is the next bureau, and then the Bureau of Drug and Alcohol Services. We partner together. All of our business overlaps with one another. And so we all work together within the division to make sure that all the folks that we serve are served and served well, and that we're not duplicating efforts. For those who don't know, the Bureau for Children's Behavioral Health is relatively new to the department. It is about 4 years old, and so we are still growing and developing our major program areas. Before 4 years ago, we did not have a Bureau for Children's Behavioral Health. We had the Bureau of Mental Health Services with one position, sometimes filled, that was considered the children's behavioral health position. And then the majority of us who works in the Bureau today worked for the Division for Children, Youth, and Services. And we were working on behavioral health issues within the construct of the child welfare system. And during that work, we discovered that really the best way to prevent children from going into the DCYF and court system was to ensure that they had adequate behavioral health services accessible to them, because that was one of the pathways that children and families find themselves engaged with DCYF. So we learned early on, more than 4 years ago, that this was an important prevention measure for kids, preventing them from going into the child welfare. So we started work on a system of care grant while we were still with DCYF, and to start building the children's behavioral health system outside of DCYF. And then 4 years ago, Commissioner Myers decided to really focus on mental health and felt that we needed a bureau to focus solely on children's mental health issues. And that is when the bureau was developed. Our main driver for this work is an RSA that was signed in 2016, and that's RSA 135F, the System of Care for Children's Mental Health. As I said, that was signed in 2016 and then was amended actually last legislative session through Senate Bill 14, which expanded the scope and the requirements of that RSA in a lot of different ways. And I will speak to those in a bit. RSA 135F also requires that DHHS and DOE work together on the development, implementation, and expansion of children's system of care. So Kelly's group at the DOE and Children's Behavioral Health have been working together since before actually our bureau was developed. And we have a great partnership today, and we are always working together, thinking of new ways in which we can improve access and the services for children that need them. So our key programs to date are provided through a number of different provider systems. The major system that you are all likely familiar with is the community mental health system. There are 10 community mental health centers around the state, and they provide a number of different behavioral health services to children. They primarily serve children above 3 to 5 years of age, all the way up through adulthood. These include all of your clinical assessments and diagnostic evaluations, and then what you would envision as higher level community-based services, individual, family, and group therapies, medication management, case management services, and some specialty services like school and employment assistance for young adults. We have currently one care management entity that provides intensive community-based services through what we call the Fast Forward program. This works in conjunction with the child's treatment provider. So it could be the community mental health center, or it could be an independent provider based on where that child is receiving their clinical services. This program and this care management entity provides enhanced care coordination for high-risk children and youth, intensive in-home and community-based supports, as well as peer support, both for the family and for the youth, if they are old enough to engage in youth peer supports. We also have a program and a federal grant that is assisting us in developing youth-specific targeted substance use disorder treatment in the communities. We have 2 pilot sites right now, one in Manchester and one in Nashua, and that is specific for youth experiencing substance use disorders. So we have 2 pilot sites right now. We have residential treatment in New Hampshire right now, and historically it's really been utilized for children and youth involved with DCYF, and in some instances with schools who need an alternative school placement. We have 13 providers who provide 29 different residential treatment programs in the state. This is going to be, we are currently working on what's called our residential transformation work, so that we can broaden access to this critical service and better define the levels of care there. So there's a lot of work going on with the residential treatment right now in New Hampshire. We also have, this is one of the things that came out of Senate Bill 14. We also have been able to hire a new staff member that is going to be focusing on infant and early childhood mental health and developing our program areas in for that age group. And so that is in development, but we're looking to provide specialized programming for infants and early children who have screened for at-risk or having some issues, or whose parents may have some issues that would put that infant at risk for behavioral or developmental issues later on. Another major program area that is currently in development is the implementation of mobile crisis for children statewide. This is another requirement of Senate Bill 14, and we were really happy about this. Mobile crisis is part of the behavioral health continuum that is available for adults in 3 different areas in the state, Concord, Manchester, and Nashua. Children were not included in that initial implementation of mobile crisis. And so now we get to work with our counterparts within the division to look at implementing mobile crisis across the state, hopefully for everyone and not just for children. But at the end of this development, we will hopefully have a well-coordinated crisis response for kids and families who are at risk and experiencing a crisis. So our current system has the provider networks that and the services that I've already described. There are a number of independent and nonprofit organizations and providers that do provide mental health and services to children that may or may not be involved in programs like Medicaid. So we do have a number of other providers that we don't directly work with, but are available to children and family experiencing some behavioral health issues. But what the system doesn't have are things like mobile crisis, and it's not cohesive, and it does have an undefined level of care and flow of how children and families can access these services. So our future system, which we're working hard to develop right now, will be well-defined with well-defined levels of care within each program or service area, and that the services are available to all children of all ages. We serve children from birth up to age 21, and we know that there's programming for certain ages and not as much programming for additional ages. And I would say the gaps in the programming for particular ages is that infant and early childhood, and then in transitional aged youth, 18 to 21. So we're really going to try and target those two age groups with specific programming within the new system. So this is just a depiction of what we envision the new system of care from the department's point of view for children and youth once we are done with all of our implementation and development. You can see that in the first tier, there would be hopefully universal screening and assessment and beginning treatment services. This is really a tier that schools will be able to assist with because they see a lot of, or most of the children in the state. And so that is a good environment in which to be able to identify children who may have beginning issues. It's not the only location though. PCPs are a prime provider source for children from infancy. They see children during their well child visits. And so we are working with the Pediatric Improvement Program to try and develop ways in which we can engage PCPs in screening. A lot of them already do screening. One of the issues is then what happens when a positive screen comes up, and we're trying to develop those programs for that purpose. The next tier is community-based treatment, care, and support. This is where the community mental health really centers do a really great job of engaging and treating children, youth, and their families. We also have federally qualified health centers that do a lot of this behavioral health treatment work and screening work too. And then tier 3 is your intensive home and community-based, like our care management entity. We'll also be having the care management entity provide a lot of oversight for children engaged in services from tier 3, 4, and 5. So we will be working with the care management entity to do that oversight so that kids who may need to do some, engage in some residential treatment or find themselves in need of a hospital stay can work with the CME on the rapid transition back to home and community and have that be as successful as possible. And sort of surrounding all of this is enhanced care coordination and access to statewide mobile crisis for families. So when we're talking opportunities with schools, we already do work a lot. Our system works a lot with schools. Many of the community mental health centers that I described here have agreements and engagements with their local schools to provide their services at the school location. They may also do other consultative type of services if that is part of their agreement with schools. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. But so providers are already engaged in the school environment and providing the services that they provide to the children who are eligible for those services in the school environment. So it's a great location in terms of access for families and children who may not have great access outside of the school environment or the school time to be able to engage in services. So I'm sure Kelly will be talking a little bit about that as well in terms of her work with the schools, but this is a good location for behavioral health delivery. As we move forward with our development, we are always going to keep an eye around what we call the location site for delivery, and keeping schools in mind and working with schools on how that is best achieved. A good example of that is our development of mobile crisis. We want to be able to develop a mobile crisis response that is accessible for children when they are in school, during school time, and how to do that with all the schools in the best and most efficient way possible. So we'll be working with Kelly's group in the school when we're at that space in our development to develop protocols for that, so that every school who may need to access and call mobile crisis for a student in crisis knows how to do that, and then in turn the mobile crisis knows how to respond in a school setting most appropriately. So Medicaid to Schools, some of you folks may have heard about the Medicaid to Schools program. This is a program that the Medicaid office allows schools to be able to bill Medicaid for Medicaid eligible services that are provided in the school environment by eligible and qualified providers. You can see here on this slide, it gives a little explanation. Some schools really avail themselves of this program and have done so for years. Some schools have not. This is all voluntary. And the ways in which schools can engage with behavioral health services in this manner are a couple of different ways. I've already spoken about one, and that is engaging with community providers who are already providing services to a population in the community, like the community mental health centers. And invite them in to do that in the school environment. And then that provider bills and does all that they need to do there. Schools can also hire or engage with their own set of providers as long as they are licensed and qualified to provide that service, and that there's a plan of care in place for that child that indicates that this service is necessary. So if all of those pieces and parts are in place, schools can actually bill Medicaid for the services rendered there. And so that is a great opportunity for schools to be able to be reimbursed for the services they already do provide or want to provide in the future. So there are options for schools on how they engage with providing these services in the school environment. Again, the last bit on this slide is either option is a great way to be able to provide services to at-risk or in-need youth who may not have great access to these services outside the school environment or the school time. So lastly, I've kind of whipped through this in order to give my friend Kelly time to describe her programming, which I am sure you'll find very interesting. But we work in partnership, I already said this, with DOE in providing opportunities for schools to be able to provide service to children who need it in the school environment. We are hopeful that, I don't know if Kelly's I don't want to steal Kelly's thunder, but we did apply for another system of care grant that we hope to receive from the federal government in order to help us work with community mental health centers and schools to expand that relationship that some already have in place or that does not exist in some instances. So we really want to get community mental health centers and schools working together in the first instance if they're not, or strengthen those partnerships in any way we can. So hopefully we will get that grant and be able to do that work. And so that's all I have, and am happy to answer any questions that anybody may have.
Thanks, Erica. Jay, I'm going to suggest actually that we go ahead and have Kelly give her presentation. She may actually address some questions that are in people's minds right now. And then when Kelly's done, we'll spend some time on folks can direct questions to either or both. Does that make sense, Jay? Okay, Jay says yes. So Kelly, and again, thanks, Erica.
Thank you, Bruce. Again, my name is Kelly Untitled, and I am the administrator in the Office of Social and Emotional Wellness, which is in the Bureau of Student Wellness at the Department of Ed. I'm going to somewhat quickly give you a lot of information that's really going to piggyback on what Erica shared and sort of expand the explanation about how those services find their way into the schools. And the roles of all of the stakeholders in that process. So I'm going to explore a little bit with you how we define student wellness and how we support it, what the work looks like currently at both the state and local levels, and then I'm going to highlight for you 3 challenges that we have seen over the years in supporting this, the implementation specifically of MTSSB locally and statewide. So the Bureau of Student Wellness is a fairly new entity within the Department of Ed. There are 3 offices within it. I wanted to make sure that I was sort of shared that with you because we're still new in our sort of rollout about our structure. So I have colleagues in the Office of Nutrition Programs and Services. That's all the school lunch programming. Additionally, there is a space for an Office of School Health, and we're looking to eventually hire a school nurse coordinator who would sort of lead that physical health component of wellness. And then lastly, there's the office in which I work, the Office of Social and Emotional Wellness. So the balance of the presentation will explore the OSO, as I call it, but there's a lot of work being done to round out our supportive wellness in the other 2 teams. So the Office of Social and Emotional Wellness started about 6 years ago with the receipt of a large federal grant called Safe Schools, Healthy Students. Since that time, we have received numerous large competitive federal funding streams that you see represented here, all with an eye to the concept that there is a lot more, there are many more factors driving the success of our students beyond the actual content delivery and receipts. You know, those wellness factors really do play a role in their ability to fully engage with and take advantage of all of the educational opportunities that are afforded to them. Our team is represented here so that you can have a sense as to how we support this work from the DOE level. Again, my name is Kelly and I'm the administrator, and I have the honor to work alongside a very competent and capable team as outlined here. We have a statewide team of Barbara, Lisa, and Ellen, and they work with me to implement the federal funding streams. We are also building a regional coaching and consultancy team that you see there in the middle row. We currently have a dedicated employee to support social and emotional work, wellness work in the Southwest, South Central, and Southeast regions. That's Molly, Catherine, and Susan. The grant that Erica alluded to would help us to add a consultant for the Lakes region and one for the North Country. So we're hoping to hear by the end of the summer and then hire on some folks to be able to round out the state. In case you don't know, these regions are actually defined by a DOE regional map. If you're unfamiliar with that, that is on the DOE website. I do like to point out that the Southwest region is a little misleading because it's actually the entire western half of the state for the most part. So it's not simply Southwest, it's a pretty large geographic area. So in addition to the DOE staff, that's the 7 of us currently, we contract with and work with some outside teams to support family engagement and evaluation and outcomes analysis of the implementation of our work. And I'm going to share some data with you in a moment. And then lastly, we work closely with the business office within the DOE to administer the grants and make sure that money gets out to local school districts. So who are we? We are a team that is really focused on this statement. Again, like I said, it's the idea that we need to not only ensure that we're teaching students, but that we are helping to ensure that the students before us are ready to receive the content and the instruction that we have to offer. We define wellness using a 7-dimensional model that's a nationally recognized model of wellness: social, personal, occupational, environmental, intellectual, emotional, and physical wellness all come together to impact the whole child. And as I continue to go through this presentation, you'll see that they aren't really standalone silos. They're much more of a Venn diagram, and oftentimes the work that we do impacts all of these things. So a quick nod to our environment today. What you're seeing here are some data points from the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. These indicate to us a few things. Again, there are some challenging experiences that a fairly large percentage of our student body are coming to school with. We know from national research that each of these indicators maps on to what's called an adverse childhood experience, and therefore rolls into the concepts of childhood trauma, potential mental health challenges, and potential mental illness. And at the very least have a strong likelihood of impacting student behavior, both sort of in the personal realm, but also within their professional realm, right? Within their experience at school. So the response that we support within the Office of Social and Emotional Wellness is effectively to define and alter this equation. We think about it as protective factors minus risk factors equals student resiliency. And it's that resiliency that helps to ensure that no matter what is happening, either outside or inside school, our students are equipped with the skills and ability to, again, take advantage of everything that the public education system in New Hampshire is offering. We support the impact on that equation through the development of something called a multi-tiered system of support for behavioral health and wellness. This really is the core of the work of our team, and it is central and primary in all of the funding streams that I referenced earlier. MTSSB is two things. It is both a process and a framework. It is a process by which we organize people to analyze data to make a strategic plan that implements services, supports, and other interventions. We're very intentional in how we talk about this because we recognize that there are limited resources, both financial and human, that are available within local school districts to really affect change. And when I say change, I'm talking about systems change, making sure that we work to support the social and emotional wellness of our students, not just now with a time-limited infusion of funding, but over the long run, throughout their entire educational career, so that they are able to develop all of those protective factors and graduate our system and move on to success later in life. So I'm going to go through a little more in depth what this process and framework look like to give you a sense of some of the specifics. What I'm about to say is representative of what's happening in a lot of districts across the state. And so you can take that as sort of my update for you. But I think it's important to know as we walk through this, this is a locally driven and community defined process and resulting framework. So there are no two districts in this state where this looks exactly the same. It's really driven by the conditions on the ground and what they're seeing within their own student body. So when we organize people, we're talking about really specific teaming structures. There are a few indicated here. I want to sort of unpack a couple of them for you. One in the upper right-hand corner, you see something called a community management team. Sometimes this is called a district community leadership team. And this is an intentional teaming of both district and community-based individuals, including families, who come together to look at community-wide data and determine what within their community can help impact and support wellness initiatives for children. Additionally, you see in the square at the bottom half of the slide, sort of a replicated list of teams at the elementary, middle, and high level. It's important to know that when done to fidelity or done in regards to best practice, MTSSB is built district-wide in every building, and all of the efforts are coordinated. And so really we are encouraging, and a lot of schools are working to build teams at the universal, targeted, and intensive level. So a bit about those designations. A universal team is looking at what should we do for our entire student body to help develop social and emotional competencies and to create access to protective factors for all students, because all students can benefit from that. Universal teams have professionals from within the school district as well as family representation. And then as you get older, it will have representation from students as well, so that everybody's voice can be at the table as part of the planning process. At the targeted and intensive levels, we have teaming structures that are coming together to talk about what services can we provide what tier 2 services can we provide in a targeted way to students with a slightly elevated need. And then at the intensive level, what do we need to do for those students and families who are at the highest level of need or at the highest level of risk? It's at these levels where the systems that Erica referenced come to the table, and they sit with the districts under a best case scenario to explore how we can leverage all of the existing service system to make sure that nobody falls through the cracks and that everybody's able to take advantage of their school experience. So that's a bit about organizing people. Again, it's a process. So once we've organized the people, what do we want them to do? We want them to analyze local and district and community data so that they can fully understand the conditions in their community. You see represented here several of the data sets that school districts are looking at to determine what their response is going to be. They include things like climate and culture surveys. These are typically done solely of staff and families because schools are challenged to manage the opt-in process for surveys like this. So in a best case scenario or a gold star scenario, we'd be able to get the students in a developmentally appropriate way to weigh in here as well, to talk a little bit about their experience with the climate and culture of the school. And that might be something down the road that some districts will consider. More common data like attendance and academic attainment, office discipline referrals, free and reduced lunch, race and ethnicity data, the YRBS data like what I just referenced. Communities are looking at all of these data points to see if they can identify the areas of need that they feel that can impact through the development of a multi-tiered system of support for behavioral health and wellness. From there, we take the data to create a plan. We really encourage districts to be thoughtful and intentional about what need they're looking to affect, what current resources exist within their community to help them make a change or impact that need. And then be very clear about where they can best direct their services to stand up new efforts, bring in new curriculum or approaches, or some combination thereof. Oftentimes, the planning step gets skipped over. It feels frivolous to folks, but we find that if you don't take the time to really understand the conditions, much like the commission is doing now, you can very easily be sort of led astray, right? And you can miss something very important that could have been very helpful. So we guide school districts to create a plan. As a result of the plan creation, schools then develop a work plan that will implement strategies, both in terms of interventions, services and supports, training and professional development for both educators, community providers, I shouldn't have said both, 3, educators, community providers, and families as necessary, so that we can make sure that all of the adults are coming to the table with the same knowledge and understanding. We also encourage schools to look at their policies and all of their other administrative structures to see what changes might be necessary in order to support their plan and to address the needs that they've seen. So an example of this might be that schools have identified lack of family-school partnership that is driving absenteeism. So one of the strategies that might be employed through a policy lens is to, or an administrative lens, is to look at your job descriptions to determine whether or not educators are required to communicate with and outreach to families. That's just a sense of how that might unfold. And additionally, we're constantly encouraging school districts to think about their funding strategies and sustainability for any intervention or response that they deem is necessary to affect the need in their community. So a little bit about the strategies. I'm going to roll through those in each of the categories I just referenced. There's graphic representation here on the screen of some of the names of the strategies and services. Most of these are that you're going to see here on the screen are happening at a universal level, if you recall that. But additional strategies, so here we're looking at interventions, services, and supports. These are some universal things that you might do: social emotional learning curriculum, you know, identification of school-wide behavior expectations and the implementation thereof. Things like service learning, or potentially a promotion of career and technical education, right? Eric's going to talk a little bit. That's the idea of a universal strategy. When we get to tier 2 and tier 3, this might be those services, co-located services from the community mental health center that Erica talked about. This might be student assistance programming in terms of providing support to students who might be at risk of substance use and abuse. So those are a few services, supports, and interventions. Professional development, it is crucial and perhaps our most powerful sustainability strategy to ensure that we are constantly educating and training our workforce to meet the needs of the students in our communities. A few trainings that our office supports that are fairly well accessed across the state include youth mental health first aid to help educators understand the signs and symptoms of a mental health challenge, and to understand what to do once you've identified those signs and symptoms. We also support and encourage suicide prevention training, as is evidenced through, I think it was SB 282, 193J now. Information about universal design for learning, classroom setup, conversations on culture and diversity, and understanding how culture and diversity impact our classroom and our school community, making sure that all of our educators are well trained on all of these things. Policy, I talked a little bit about the idea of looking at job descriptions, discipline policy, maybe the schedule of the day. How are we structuring our time to ensure that we're addressing the needs and the challenges that our students are seeing? Our handbooks, strategic plans. We also here encourage schools to think about strategically about relationships and partnerships that they can develop with organizations outside of their building. That often includes after-school programming and entering into official and formal memorandums of understanding so that the roles of all of the organizations are defined and everyone is clear and understands what services they can access to support their students. One other thing that I should mention, I keep talking about services and supports for students. It's worth mentioning that as time has gone on, we've really seen a need to better support our educators. Educator burnout and sort of vicarious trauma that's being passed through to our educators has become a huge problem. And it's really a driving force for a lot of the turnover that we're seeing. And that in and of itself is causing us some challenges with standing up these systems. So funding, currently, MTSSB is an optional approach, but many school districts are trying to figure out how to make it work. Currently, our team administers several large competitive federal funding streams. Those are grants that I write for, and if like the one that Erica spoke about earlier, and if we're lucky enough to get those, we're able to fund a handful of districts and provide them funding to support pieces of the work. Additionally, districts are trying to think about more creative and diverse ways of using the more stable funding streams like IDEA, like the title programs. 21st Century is another funding stream that they're leaning on for that after school time. A lot of school districts are trying to collect funds through local community organizations and sort of foundation type grants through their community financial institutions, New Hampshire Charitable Foundation, things like that. And really, I've been very impressed with their efforts to be creative in figuring out how to fund the development of a multi-tiered system of support. So I promised to share some data. What you're seeing here is an example from one school district here in New Hampshire. Each line chart represents a different school within that district. On each line chart, you'll see that there's data over 3 school years. The green line represents the school's progress towards fidelity of MTSSB. And when I say that, I mean, how close are they getting to best practice implementation and development of the system? So a line going up means they're getting closer to having a system that has been developed to fidelity. The blue line is the number of office discipline referrals in that school. The takeaway from this chart is that the closer you get to having a MTSSB that meets fidelity, the less office discipline referrals you're having with your students. So what? It means that folks have more time to do the other things that we want them to do, right? Administrators have more time to participate in the school culture, the school community. School teachers have more time to actually deliver content and engage with their students. And students themselves are in class more and being able to take better advantage of all of the opportunities that are available to them. So a few of the challenges that we've seen over our time doing this work. Firstly, there's a tension, increasingly so, about how to impact that formula, how to continue to develop protective factors, which candidly are exactly the skills and aptitudes that employers are telling us they want students to have. How do we continue to focus on that while also attending to the increasing social, emotional, and behavioral challenges that we see, those risk factors? We're also finding that the complex funding strategies for this work are a challenge because they're often time limited, they're often competitive grants, they're fairly precarious in terms of their availability, and often, as is the case with title funds, they're multi-purpose. So they're needing to address many goals and many objectives above and beyond student wellness. And then the last challenge that we're really seeing is that oftentimes the funding that is provided is really directed at standing up those interventions, those services and supports. And there's very little funding to support all of the other aspects of the process and the framework, all of the systems change, which really at the end of the day, that's what we're aiming for. We want to change the way school business is done so that these things are kind of baked in the cake and not necessarily an afterthought. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Thanks. So let's take a few minutes to ask any clarifying questions. And we'll pay attention to our time a little bit here so that Eric has plenty of time as well. But let's pause now and see if there are any immediate questions for either Erica or Kelly. And Chris has raised her hand, and you can either use the function to raise your hand, or you can do like Jane does, and that's wave at me. But Chris, will start with you and then Jane.
Really a question probably for you both, and I know it'll be hard to answer, but there is from the school's point of view, there's sort of a voluntary aspect to all this in terms of maybe what capacity they have to get involved. And I'm wondering if you can characterize at all whether you think it's the schools that in fact do have the highest needs who are getting involved, or whether schools that have really high needs may not have the bandwidth or the capacity to be taking advantage of these services. And I know that's I'm asking for a real broad scope, but what's your perspective on that?
So I would say that at this point, I feel like I've probably talked to every district in the state in some way, shape, or form. I think I have yet to find a district who isn't trying to do something in this space. Their ability to do something large or small is definitely driven by those factors. But I think that there's definitely almost universal acknowledgement that something needs to be done.
I would also just add to that that is a perfect reason for schools to reach out to their community providers versus trying to tackle some of these services themselves. That can be really burdensome for smaller schools to be able to figure out and provide. So engaging with the community providers that are already doing that is great. One of the things that I didn't mention that Kelly did, but it stands true for the behavioral health system and Medicaid to School program, is that what it doesn't support is that consultative and other broader involvement in broader programming for all students. It is really targeted for an eligible student to receive an eligible service from an eligible provider. So there is that gap even within those, that level of service at school that schools need to address if that's something that they need to support their students more effectively.
And then Jay, and then Rick.
Did Jane have a hand up there?
Yeah, Jane.
Great. Erica and Kelly, thank you so much. That was a great presentation. Erica, just a quick question. In terms of the new systems of care diagram that you showed us in level 1 that mentioned screenings and individual and group therapies through independent providers, where does funding come for that?
It's a great question. So in a variety of ways, insurance pays for screening and assessment. As part of well-child checks, a lot of screening happens during those. I know a lot of schools also do some levels of screenings, whether it's developmental or behavioral, which can be sometimes interchangeable at a very young age. Early intervention is a program funded by the department as well. And that is a program that screens children more for developmental, but they will pick up a lot of issues that may be raised during those screenings. And Medicaid, as an insurer, Medicaid does pay for early and periodic screening, diagnostic evaluations, and treatment as a core benefit for children's enrolled in Medicaid.
I have one more follow-up.
Yeah, please.
You also mentioned mental health centers in schools. Do you have a sense of how many schools have mental health centers? And is there how are they funded? And is there any data around the positive impact that such a model has?
Right, we do. I think Kelly may have a number or ballpark. So it is funded through their normal funding stream. So the child does have to be found eligible for community mental health center programming. They accept all forms of insurance. Their primary funding source is through Medicaid billing. So once a student is identified and found eligible, which the eligibility for children's at a community mental health is fairly broad, so we can catch a lot of kids there. They can then serve them and bill their normal course of billing for them, either through Medicaid or private insurance. Kelly, do you recall how many schools are engaged with?
I know how many are receiving our competitive funding streams, which is around 20 districts. However, there are significantly more districts who have developed these relationships on their own. The department doesn't collect that information in an official way, so I hesitate to estimate it for you, but it's something that we talk about quite a bit.
Thank you.
I believe it's more than half of the community mental health centers have some sort of agreement with some schools in their area. You know, there are multiple school districts in each CMHC catchment area. We also don't collect data based on location of service that would capture school. So we could not at this point in time pull data for how many CMHC involved children are receiving their services at a school location. So unfortunately, we don't have that data for you, but hopefully that is part of our system improvements that we can work on.
Thank you.
Go to Jay and then Rick, and then we'll probably need to move on to Eric soon.
So Erica and Kelly, thank you very much for your presentations, the organization of your presentations particularly. So we've got 168,000 students in schools. We've got 29,000 students with IEPs and about 10,000 students who have special needs. That if I'm wrong with any of those numbers, just feel free to correct me. As a school funding commission, we're looking at what's base adequacy. So that might be what you define every student needs to benefit from those opportunities. And then we've got differentiated needs, much of which would seem like your presentations fit that category. And so is there accurate enough data to either quantify the populations that you're trying to address across every school? Or are there socioeconomic factors by school, town, that are good indicators for where the targeted assistance needs to be applied?
If I may jump in first, just one point of clarification. When I talk about the universal tier for multi-tiered systems of support, that's for all students, regardless of challenges. So your sort of standard, typical run-of-the-mill AB student, they'll benefit from universal strategies that are employed across the district that will help to keep them from moving up in need and sort of developing a higher intensity need. Additionally, they'll help those students develop the social and emotional skills, things like critical thinking, communication, those protective factors that will help them in the long run. The other benefit of a universal approach first is that it helps to lessen the impact for those students who do have higher level of needs and helps to sort of pull them down that pyramid of services and supports. So that's just a bit about the process and the framework that we help to support. In terms of an indicator about how to fund the work, we actually look at three things, which I'm not exactly sure how you would necessarily quantify in your role, but I can tell you what they are and leave that to you. So we look at the quantifiable need, like you're alluding to, free and reduced lunch rates, community poverty, community violence, those sorts of things. The existence of disparate populations, whether by race or ethnicity or other categories. Additionally, we look at the district's readiness and willingness to engage in innovative and robust way of thinking. Now, these three categories that we consider are what we do when we're trying to determine who should get a small piece of a small pot of money. I'm not sure how you would bring that to scale across the state. One, I would argue that there are some structural and systemic ways that you can ensure that universal population and the system is built. And that would almost be flat rate funding to support the system, as it were. But again, I'm not really in a position to weigh in on that too much, but that's sort of how we think about it at our team.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Just to add to that, I would say, the getting our arms around the need and data is very difficult right now because our systems and our service systems are so siloed at this point. One of the things that we have continually sort of lamented is the idea that the Department of Education and school data and the DHHS data do not meet in any informative way. There is limitations in what schools can provide or DOE can provide to help us assess that more accurately. And Kelly could probably speak more about that intelligently than I can, but it's been a real struggle to really get our arms around need and identification of how many kids are we talking about at each sort of level of within the triangle that Kelly's been referencing.
Just one small example of the challenges for the collection and sharing of data. We have districts in the state who have been unable to invest in a data system. So we have districts that are doing handwritten data collection on pieces of paper with pen in their front office. So how do you get that data from the administrative assistant's desk to community providers, all the way up through all of the systems with the barriers that Erica is alluding to?
Just one thing I'd like to add, if I may. Thank you both for your presentation. To see that the work that has been provided in these last 4 years has been amazing, both from the DOE and the DHHS, and I do hope that they're going to continue to come together and collaborate. It has made a huge difference compared to where we were 4 years previously. And I've worked in education a long time. The work has really been amazing to watch and to see grow. And I hope there will be that collaboration. We need that data. We need to know how to proceed with a universal practice. So thank you very much, both of you.
Rick, do you have just a quick question?
Yes, I do. Recently in Spark, that's the UNH research review for 2020, it was noted that the University of New Hampshire, Durham received a grant from the Department of HHS on the federal level, $26.8 million. And Kim Nesbitt is now, who's in the family department there, and early childhood, is working towards trying to discern where these issues exist within our state. And I guess I'm like Jay, I'm looking for the quantitative data. We have another report that comes out of the Annie E. Casey Foundation Kids Count Report, which says that New Hampshire's #1 in the nation in terms to child well-being. However, we know we have holes all over the state where there's not that equal access, the opportunity due to either location or family income. What are we finding out? Is UNH now sharing with state HHS? Is UNH also sharing with DOE? And how can we get this thing tied together so that we can really get the information needed? If we are going to head down that road for preschool education, we're going to have that quantitative information.
So let me just interject here, Erica and Kelly, that Rick, you're referring to, as you said, the preschool development grant and strategic plan that the feds have supported and now have provided the additional $26 million over the next several years. On June 15th, in about 10 days, we'll be having Deborah Nelson from DHHS come talk to us about the preschool and early childhood care system in the state specifically, as well as Kim Firth from the Endowment for Health, who oversees all the early childhood grants that the endowment makes. And Kelly, you might comment on this as well, but currently there is not a person in DOE who is responsible specifically for the early childhood piece. But in any case, as I say, in 10 days, this group's June 15 meeting will be really drilling in on early childhood system of care and how that intersects with the public schools, preschool programs, particularly the special education programs, but also public schools that are now choosing to move into more pre-K services.
Bruce, do you work with Kim Nesbitt over there?
Yes, yeah, the Carsey School and Kim Nesbitt are absolutely coordinating our efforts.
And my department is involved in that preschool development grant as well, as many other parts of DHHS and I believe DOE.
At the DOE, we have what's called an early childhood intervention team that is staffed by UNH and led internally by the deputy commissioner. and we meet monthly. And so I am working, I am intentionally working to make sure that everything that I just talked about is plugged into the efforts of that grant.
And interestingly enough, we also have an early childhood integration team, and the two integration teams at each department bridges to one another. We sometimes meet together to make sure each team is aware of what the other is doing. So our departments are well plugged into that work and to each other.
Thanks so much, Erica and Kelly. I really appreciate it. You've whetted our appetite here. I'm sure we have lots more questions, and I'll convey the group's questions to you. If folks have additional questions, please send them to me or Jordan, and we'll be sure that we'll pass them along to Erica and Kelly. So Eric Frauworth, thanks for your patience, and we'll turn it over to you for the next 20, 25 minutes or so. And then...
Sure. Thank you. And don't worry, I'm only going to be talking about money, so it's not complicated at all. Let me see if I can get my second screen to share. Let's see. How do we do? Did that work? Okay, so I will give you a little brief piece on myself and my office, but then I will get right into the meat of the school funding piece of it. So I am Eric Frauworth, the administrator of the Bureau of Career Development at the Department of Ed. I have an office staff of 7, and the major focus of our office is to support career tech programs at within the public school system, primarily at the high schools, the community college system, and the state corrections system. Our office also works with the dropout prevention grants, the apprenticeship programs, and we are the one of the representatives for the Office of Civil Rights. We manage the Office of Civil Rights inspections for career tech high schools to make sure that our career tech high schools and colleges meet any of the federal guidelines. So a bit about career tech education. In New Hampshire, there are 20 career tech, or we refer to as CTE regions within New Hampshire. And every school district is assigned to one of those regions. And within those 20 regions are 26 CTE centers. Most are physically attached to high schools, but some are separate buildings within close proximity of a high school. And those 26 CTE centers are, in our vernacular, are referred to as receiving districts. And the 100 some odd other districts who do not have a CTE center are sending districts. So later on, as I talk a little bit about students moving from receiving and sending districts, that's what those refer to. And we also work with our neighbors in Vermont. We have 5 CTE centers along the border. They're in Vermont. They're part of the Vermont CTE system, but they're physically closer number of our high schools that we send our students over to Vermont. So we do provide some funding to Vermont schools when our students go that way. And there are a handful of Vermont students that come to our center. So it does work both ways. The programs at each of these centers, they do vary by location, as all of the programs are designed to support overall state, but specifically local and regional employment needs. So the programs you will see vary from center to center around the state. So one of the major funding sources for CTE programs is Perkins. Perkins is actually the Strengthening Career and Technical Education for the 21st Century Act. So it's much easier to say Perkins. And it is Perkins 5. This is the 5th incarnation of that law. It's a federal formula grant to provide funding for each of the states for career and tech education. We receive funding every year. It's a 27-month grant, but we do receive a new allocation of funds every year. And that funding is based on the previous allocation the state had, and taken into consideration is the population of students in the state who are living below the poverty line. So that's where this allocation comes in. The original purpose of Perkins funding from the federal government was to help elevate lower income families so the students could get an education and enter the workforce. So our most recent fiscal allocation from federal government was just over $6 million. So how do we split that up? Within the federal law, there is very specific details as to how that money is distributed. So 15% of that allocation remains in our office for administrative purposes. The remaining 85% must be provided out to the students. And that 85% is split between secondary and post-secondary, and that split is determined at the state level. And historically, New Hampshire has split it approximately 80-20, 80% to secondary, 20% to post-secondary. And the post-secondary distribution goes to CCSNH, and it is then distributed out to the campuses, and that is based on the student population at those campuses who are Pell eligible. So again, it keeps that same standard of raising students up who are coming from the lower incomes. And then the distribution to the 26 regional CTE centers is done not only by the total number of students who live in those communities, but also by another percentages based on the students, again, living below the poverty line. So the 20 regions, as they're divided up, a pot of money goes to that region. And then if there are multiple CTE centers in that region, because again, we have 26 centers, 20 regions, that money is then distributed amongst the centers within that region. And the centers all have an agreement as to how that money is distributed. Each year, the CTE centers have to submit to us their annual request for funds, their budget for how they intend to spend the money. It is not a grant request under an RFP. It is a formula grant, so they're getting the money. We just need to approve their budget as to how they're going to spend that money. And that money is intended to supplement, not supplant, what's going on. So it's an enhancement. The theory being, if on the off chance the federal government no longer funds the Perkins program, the CTE centers are supposed to be able to continue running. They are supposed to be funded at a state and local level, with Perkins being used to enhance it. Enhancements could be such things as in a health science program, being able to purchase the new computerized mannequins, as opposed to just having the basic mannequins. So that's what the Perkins is intended to do as an enhancement. So how else are our centers funded? The centers are built and renovated by a combination of state and local funds. Up to 75% of the building costs can be state funds. Once the building is complete, it belongs to the school district where it resides. And they are then responsible for all upkeep and maintenance and staffing of that building. So although the state may pay for a large portion of the build of it, it belongs to that local community. All operating funds are responsible of that host district. And the second way that there is state money that comes into these schools is through tuition and transportation. And this is the meat of my conversation with you all as to how this money is allocated. So there's currently a line item in the state budget under Department of Education for tuition and transportation. And I believe 2 years ago, it was increased to $9 million per year. So that money is intended to be used to reimburse sending districts for the transportation of students to the receiving schools. And it is also supposed to be used to repay a portion of the tuition for the students at the CTE center. There's a formula for each category, so I'm going to go into those, and I'm sure this is where the questions are all going to come at the end. So the first piece of it is the transportation. So sending districts are reimbursed at a rate of 10 cents per mile per student who are transported on a bus. The interesting piece is a bus costs the same regardless of how many kids are on it. But the district is only reimbursed 10 cents per kid per mile as they transport. If a student is given permission to transport themselves, some are, there has to be a justifiable reason, then the student can be reimbursed 25 cents per mile for their driving themselves. School districts will submit a form in February and then again in June for each of the 2 semesters, and they will be reimbursed the following December 1st. So the school district is out an entire year and a half before they get, if they start paying in September for a bus, it isn't until the following December 1st that they're reimbursed for that money. So I did provide out some handouts, and so the transportation handout is the sheet that goes vertical, and it lists all of the school districts down the left-hand side. And in this example, the first column will be the amount of money that the school districts report that they actually paid for transportation. The next column of amount is what was reimbursed at that 10 cent per mile. So that final column is the difference. And in most instances, it's a positive number, which means that school district is out that much money. So based on the 10 cent per formula, we reimbursed schools just over $670,000. But in order to fully pay them back for all of the transportation they made, we're short almost $2 million. But the way the law is generated, we don't reimburse them for the whole bus ride, only the 10 cent per mile. So the next piece is, so we've paid this amount of money out. So once the transportation is paid out, the remaining pot of money is used to reimburse or to supplement the tuition payments paid to the receiving schools. So there is a formula allocation to determine how much a CTE student tuition is, and it varies from school to school. So it will start with the district determining their individual cost per student at the secondary level, and every school district knows this number. The CTE center then calculates what portion of that district cost can be allocated to CTE, because the students only come for a part of the day. So that factor is somewhere between 20 and 40% of the cost, and each individual CTE center determines their figure and reports it to us. We put that into the formula. That determines the CTE tuition for a student who is coming from a sending school. Per RSA 188, the sending district is responsible for 25% of that tuition. So when the student signs up, they make it past the first week of school, the CTE center district will send a bill to the sending district and say, you've got 40 students here coming to us, here's what their total tuition is, please send the tuition to us. The state then sends the other 75% to the CTE center. Unfortunately, we've paid all the transportation first, so the only money that's left is whatever's left in that pot from the $9 million. The way the law is written, if that pot of money does not meet the need to fit the full 75% tuition, which it rarely does, everybody gets a piece of the pie. So what used to happen was it would be distributed proportionally. So everybody would get, if all that was if there was only 85% of the money was available, every CTE center would get 85% of what they were due from the state. Several years ago, that was amended. And so that would have been at least equitable. Everybody wouldn't get all their money, but it was equitable. Under the new way the rule is set up, that pot of money is divided by the number of CTE students in the state to come up with a CTE tuition dollar figure from the state. And then every sending student travels with that amount of money. So the second set of spreadsheets that I provided you shows this. It shows what every CTE center's full tuition is, what their 75% would be coming from the state, but then it shows what the state was able to actually pay. Because in this past year, when we divided what was left over, the amount of money available per student was $3,800.06. So that was then multiplied by the number of students the center has, and the money was sent to them. And so you'll see in the final column of this chart, most of them have parentheses around them. So they're in the negative, which meant that the CTE center was being underfunded. So what happens when that happens? They didn't get all of their tuition. They go back to the sending district and they say, we know you already paid your 25%, but the state didn't pay their full 75%, so you need to pay us the difference. And they go back to the sending districts for an additional allotment of money. And you will notice that there are a few schools on this list where the number is positive. What that means is the state's $3,000 was actually higher than the 75% tuition. But nobody checked on that and sent the school the full amount anyway, because that's the way the formula goes. And in the end, just like the transportation piece, if we were to fully fund that 75% for all schools, it would require an additional $2.2 million. So although $9 million, to anybody at a school would say that's a huge amount of money, it's actually $4 million short for meeting the need of all of our schools, just at the bare minimum of 10 cents per mile, to supersede the 10 cents per mile and cover the full 75% tuition. So the question is, what do others do? Every state in the country has a completely different formula for how they fund CTE, career tech education. Next door in Massachusetts, they run regional CTE centers, which are four-year high schools. So unlike here, they don't go for a part day. They decide that's their high school. They're just going to go for the entire day. So in addition to whatever traditional state funds that school would get, every student is attached to them is $5,120, which is Chapter 74 adequacy money. And so every student, that money goes to the school, the state understanding costs this much more to run CTE. The last couple of years, those CTE centers were full with huge wait lists. So comprehensive high schools started to open up CTE programs at their comprehensive high schools. And once those programs were approved as Chapter 74, that $5,000 follows that student. So Peabody High School is a great example. They belong to Northern Essex Vocational Technical High School. If a student from Peabody goes to Northern Essex, the $5,000 goes with them. But if Peabody High School opens a business management program and the student from Peabody stays at Peabody High School gets an additional $5,000 for that student, even though they didn't go anywhere, because the state acknowledges that program costs more. In our regional CTE programs, the only time the tuition money moves is if it is from a sending school to a receiving school. So students who are Concord High School students who go to the Concord Career and Tech Center, there is no tuition money that comes. Concord is responsible for the full education of that student. Delaware has a multi-step approach to calculating base allocation for all of their educational programs. My counterpart in Delaware would be happy to provide a presentation. He said he's done this before. It is a fairly complicated and convoluted process, but he's able to show where CTE falls in the realm of adequacy. Their office is a little different. They oversee 5 regional high schools that are full CTE high schools, as well as they oversee the CTE programs located at the comprehensive high schools all over the state of Delaware. And there are CTE programs at 98% of high schools in Delaware. There are only 2 high schools that chose not to have CTE programs, and it's 2 of their charter schools opted not to do it. But that office has a budget of $89 million to fund those 5 CTE high schools and then pay the salary, the 75% of the salary for CTE teachers at comprehensive high schools. They also then receive Perkins money. So I like to use Delaware as a comparison because they receive about the same amount of Perkins that we do. We receive $6 million, they receive $5.5 million in Perkins funds. But if you look at their difference for how they break down the school, the big noticeable is with their school population. They have 19 school districts and 45 high schools. We have well over 100 school districts and 82 high schools. But we're only servicing 20,000 more kids than they are. So there's a big disparity there in where sort of the breakdown of the money comes. But 26,000 of their high school students participate in CTE, which represents almost 60% of their high school population, based off of that same $5.5 million in Perkins. We only service about 9,000 students in CTE, which is only 14% of our high school population. And so sort of theirs is a great example to show where Perkins supplements what they're doing, but the bulk of their CTE money is coming from state support. The fear we really have in New Hampshire is if Perkins were to disappear, a large percentage of our CTE programs would either close or have to shrink down considerably because they are heavily, heavily relying on the Perkins funds. And with that, I will be happy to entertain questions.
Great, thanks so much, Eric. And so questions for the group?
Oh,
sorry, Rick, it looks like Rick, you're talking, and then Dave has his hand.
You're muted, Rick.
Yeah, I'm on the CTE Advisory Commission, so is Val. But Eric, maybe you can explain the percentage of high school kids in Delaware that are participating in this highly skill-oriented program versus, you did mention the percentage in New Hampshire.
Yep. In Delaware, it's 60%. Because they have 5 CTE high schools which are based in their counties where the students will attend full-time. That's the high school they choose, similar to the Massachusetts model. But then every single high school in Delaware has at least one, if not more, CTE programs at the high school. So students, there's almost no reason that they wouldn't participate. And sort of along those lines, what I can tell you is a school such as Plymouth here in New Hampshire has a CTE center attached. And they're a regional high school, so they do not have any sending school districts. Their students are all the sending districts are already coming to Plymouth. 85% of Plymouth high school students take at least one CTE course because there's no extra cost associated anywhere. It's physically in the building and they can just pick it as an elective. Conway, similar answer. Portsmouth, similar answer. 80 to 85% of the students participate. But when it comes to having to transport and then a school district reimbursing tuition, there are school districts who will say, we're only going to budget to send 10 kids to CTE.
Correct.
Because we know it's not getting reimbursed. And so it's diminishing the number of students because it's coming out of the school system's budget and they don't want to give that precious, precious money up.
Dave, did you have a question?
Yeah, it was right. Right along the same lines as what Rick asked. But Eric, thanks very much for presenting today. The whole idea of transportation is sort of I guess it's a disincentive for participation, and certainly a disincentive from the cost structure as well. But is there anything else that Delaware is doing though, in terms of the program of studies that's connected with CTE that makes it that much more attractive, even at connected right to the school?
No, I think it's really more, it's based on the structure of the system and the fact that CTE is housed where the students are. And I will say that our office has contracted with an outside consulting firm who's doing a study, and some of you may have been contacted already by them, to provide New Hampshire with options for how we can extend equitable access to CTE, because we know this busing piece is a hurdle.
Right.
But that's not going to change all that quickly. We're always going to have busing, and the question is, what are some other alternatives to make it a little more enticing for a school district to participate in regional programming.
Mm-hmm.
Eric, what's the timing for that report that you've contracted?
So that report was supposed to come to us in August. Due to COVID-19 and the schools not being physically present, they're struggling with doing a lot of the interviews that they wanted to do. They wanted to interview students and teachers and parents, and it's a lot harder. So we actually yesterday just gave them the go-ahead to delay issuing their report until December, with the hope in the fall they may have an opportunity to start talking. But the task force is meeting actively, and they've already come up with sort of the list of challenges. So the next piece will be the list of opportunities.
Thanks. Other questions for Eric?
So on a follow-up on the cost aspect of it, and I should know this from my school board days, but does the ADMA, so Dave in Hopkinton is a CTE student. Does Dave count on the ADMA for adequacy for Hopkinton, and as opposed to, all right.
Yeah, so he is, because our CTE centers are part-time, so he belongs to whatever school district is his home school district, and so Hopkinton will get the adequacy, and basically that's the piece is when he then goes to his CTE center, Hopkinton takes part of that adequacy money and sends it over to the CTE center as part of that tuition, because they're educating him for 25% of the time.
Right.
That was the theory behind it.
Right, but in addition, Hopkinton gets a little bit more adequacy for Dave because of the 25-75 prorated split.
Well, that money, the 75% money, goes from the state to the CTE center.
Right.
Right.
Goes to the CTE center directly.
Goes to the CTE center.
All right.
Yeah.
And that offsets tuition.
That is intended to offset tuition. So
right.
CTE center doesn't need to bear the brunt of educating a Hopkinton student. Somebody's got to pay for it. But Hopkinton say they get $10,000 adequacy for this kid. They then pay $4,000 to the CTE center. They keep the rest of it because the rest of the day they're still educating him when he comes back to his Hopkinton High School.
Right. Yeah, I guess I'm just saying that I'm just sort of thinking out loud that while the student is being educated at the CRTC in Concord, the student's not at Hopkinton.
Correct.
And so the instructional services are being done in Concord, yet there's an additional cost component or additional expense component over and above adequacy.
Yes. The state is paying for the student twice.
Right.
Yes, the state is absolutely paying for the student twice.
Okay.
Yep. Because money goes to Hopkinton, and when the kid leaves, Hopkinton still has that money, even though they're not educating him for that amount of. So yes.
Right. And then I guess my third comment on it would be when I was on the board, I can definitely confirm what you're saying, Eric, that we would budget for, let's say, 11 students or 15 students or something like that. And that board members and the administration would, I mean, we absolutely love the CRTC program in Concord, but we bristle at the fact that the students have to spend an hour in transportation.
Absolutely.
And Steve Chamberlain's mantra was time is the currency of education.
Yep, without doubt. And and that's sort of the double-edged sword, because if the kid chooses to do it and they travel back and forth, it could run them the risk of not having enough credits to graduate because they missed 3 periods from their sending high school during this weird transition back and forth. So, so we know that there are counselors who look at that whole thing and say, you can't do it because of these. So yes, multiple confounding problems.
Right. Thanks so much, Eric.
Yep.
I'll just in opinion, propose to a question. Having served on the SB 190 committee with Rick since its inception and being on advisory boards at a couple of CTE centers, it is incredibly apparent that the state funds CTE because it has to, not because it wants to. And from the perspective of the business community, this is the biggest mistake in providing an adequately educated workforce. All the other stuff is meaningless to the business community when you don't have people coming in capable of working. I mean, it is incredibly frustrating to see this Byzantine architecture in place to disincentivize people from using the CTEs when you have a state like Delaware that's smaller than us that provides 20 times as much money for their CTEs because they believe in the concept and the benefit to the state. And to me, that the state's compelling interest in education is to provide a workforce that can contribute to society, both economically and from civic engagement. And when you don't do anything to help the kids really prepare themselves for the work world, you're doing an incredible disservice to all of the students of the state. And we're all struggling with, I have an employee yesterday who told me he didn't know how to figure out percentages. I mean, this is the sort of employee that we have to deal with. And the state is completely, to me, just completely oblivious to the needs of the workforce, even though there's a lot of wonderful words and incentives about how much we cherish education and everything. The fact of the matter is we're not preparing the kids for school for the real world. And when you define adequacy, it's like to what end and to what means. If you're defining adequacy only to make the kids prepared to go to more school, that's not, from the business perspective, the definition that we would want. The definition is these people should be prepared to be contributors to society, and that means they need to be able to have some sort of skill that they can apply and contribute financially to tax base and everything else. And it is, as you can hear, incredibly frustrating year after year after year being on this committee and seeing all the barriers that are put in place and the disincentives that districts have to implement these things. And it goes back to day one. We never set up a CTE system that was intended to be successful. If we did, we would have had something like Massachusetts does. The only four-year school we have is MST, and even that's an exception to every aspect of the rules that govern CTE. So there's a lot of lip service, but not a lot of real support for this, and it's incredible frustration to the business community. And we spend so much time trying to work with schools and with internships and CTE and mentoring and everything else, and yet the system is just beating it down.
Any other specific questions?
It's a shame, Val, you're not passionate. But I want to say that I think the fact that you all invited me here is a testament to the fact that somebody at least is asking the questions now, and I appreciate that.
I got a question for you, Eric.
Yeah, sure.
One of the major costs in the CTE program is capital improvements.
Absolutely.
And we're nearing the end of the schedule of this round right now.
Yes.
Is the department looking at trying to just start this whole thing over again? If you do that, it's, I'll be just as frustrated as Val is right now, and I am.
I will. So if I'll give you 30 seconds on that one. So I did mention at the beginning of the presentation that the state partners with the locals to do the build or the renovation. And the way the legislation was set up was in the order in which the CTE centers were built, there was a running list, and in every biennium, X amount of money was put out for the next school in the system for a renovation or a rebuild. And they could apply for up to 75% of the CTE center's rebuild. And you'll know, Dover just did their entire building. And so the CTE portion of it got 75% of its funding from the state and 25% from a local bond. Hudson is doing it right now. And with 26 centers, it takes that many years to get through them all. And by the time you cycle back around to the first one, it was 10 years beyond when it should have been renovated. And we already decided that doesn't make any practical sense whatsoever. And what we will be proposing and we want to be sitting down with our legislators to help us figure out how we propose this, that to decide what that amount allocated is. So if it's 15 million, 20 million, whatever it was that we normally were allocating to this renovation, keep that pot of money available, but make it available for an RFP grant process. Massachusetts has adopted something called the Mass Skills Capital Grant, where they have this huge pot of money and the schools can apply for money based on projects that they would like to do with their school that require capital improvement. And you can apply for them every 2 years. So once you get one, you have to wait 2 years before you can apply for it again. But you don't have to wait 25 years before you can apply for it. And we think that will be a better way for the schools to keep much more modern in their system than waiting 25 years to be able to put in an auto shop. Unless you have another thought on this, Rick, we will be proposing this though, but Senator Waters has been poking me about this, and I sat down with the commissioner and we said there's absolutely no way we're going to start this process over again because it just does not make fiscal sense.
You need to listen to Dave.
I have the same question, Rick. Eric, was also the capital improvement issue. So thank you, Rick, for asking the question first. But also, you mentioned a little bit about the apprenticeship program. Do you work with that as well? Could you just say something about that?
Sure. We have a little piece of it. The community college system has the majority of the bulk of the apprenticeship programs. But there are I believe it's the electrical and the plumbing programs that are adult ed systems. And so we process the tuition that comes in, we process the payments out to the systems, and send out the certificates when the students complete the apprenticeships. That's sort of the extent of where we live in apprenticeship land.
Okay.
We work hand in hand with the community college system, that with the goal being our CTE programs, as many as possible, will dovetail into the pre-apprenticeship. So when the students leave our high school programs, they've already completed the first year of their apprenticeship, and then they can move right into it.
That's right. Thanks so much.
Yep, sure.
Any other questions for Eric before we do a little bit of a closing discussion here? Eric, thank you so much. Again, you've whetted people's appetite. We could stay here for the whole meal. Thanks. But we may come back to you for seconds. So recognizing the time and the fact that it's late on a Friday at the end of a pretty tough week for lots of reasons. And Jay and Dave, you can respond to what I'm about to frame here or suggest. On Monday, I know you can't wait because we'll be right back together again for a full commission meeting. At this point, we don't have any presentations scheduled for the full commission meeting. We're still waiting to hear from Senator Guida. That'll be a little bit later into June and July. But actually, that seems to me an opportunity for us as a full commission to really share in some detail what each of the work groups has been discovering over the past couple of weeks with its various presentations, and to process and digest what all of this means, particularly for the question that this group is asking, because that really is in terms of sequence, this question of the definition of adequacy, understanding the differential pieces of adequacy and what the costs are. And on Monday, we'll be joined by our colleagues from AIR to help the full commission understand its first steps towards providing some briefing documents that can help us begin to look at the definitions of adequacy, particularly as used in states with similar judicial and legislative characteristics as New Hampshire. Kansas and New Jersey are the primary examples. So what I'm suggesting is that we might want to take a couple of minutes today to reflect on what we've heard from our colleagues at DHHS and DOE, and really anticipate a deeper discussion that focuses on the definitions of adequacy and also the kind of data analysis that AIR is doing that I know Bill and others here are especially interested in. So I'll stop there and just kind of put that out as a kind of a next step suggestion.
Yeah, Bruce, I think that's absolutely right on. I think it would be a good time now for the commission to basically have a full group discussion on a lot of the things that we've heard about, and also really for the first time to really hear, you know, from Jesse and the team from AIR on their approach as well to the you know, helping us out with the definition of a cost of an adequate education, or an opportunity for an adequate education, and the components that go into this, because they're going to be doing, you know, talk a little bit about their regression process to get to the base cost, and then the differential factors that go into it to really provide you know, an equitable cost model for each district. And I think, you know, well, some of the things we've learned today about how CTE isn't part of it, doesn't sound like that's part of the base adequacy function. Is that correct, Rick?
It's not part of it, but it's so frustrating to Val and myself that if a child is taking a course at the CTE program, and let's say there's mathematics or geometry involved, that doesn't count as the geometry credit. You got to go back to the school and take it in that archaic situation, which is not hands-on. So we're not taking advantage of the CTE programs the way we really
it's
should.
You know, so I wouldn't call traditional math courses archaic, but if they're getting the competency, if they're learning that through CTE, CTE shouldn't just be counted as an extra. You know, as an extra, right?
But it is, and you know, I mean, it seems like the districts fight the whole concept of competency. They don't want to have a math learned in a CTE count towards math because it takes away from the math teacher. I mean, those are the arguments that we hear all the time. So we're supposed to be a competency-based education system. You got the system fighting that process and, you know, clawing at it bit by bit. So, I mean, the adequacy, you know, should be sort of a rational approach. And there are so many competing interests that it becomes a, you know, a hodgepodge of Byzantine rules and impediments. And, you know, it seems illogical to me.
All right, so we're not going to have the discussion right now.
I know. I'm just
have it on Monday.
Yeah.
Senator Estabrook, Iris wants to jump in. Unmute.
You're on mute, Iris.
Iris, can't hear you. Iris.
Iris, you're on mute.
I was on mute, yes. I was going to say the same thing. The discussion was already getting pretty deep. And forward to it on Monday. It gave me a few new thoughts about it that I will save until then. I got to go at 5 today. Have a good weekend.
Great. Thank you, Iris. You as well.
And I'll just add that sort of from other hats that I wear as I spend time in school districts, the social emotional learning piece that Kelly touched on, that's connected back to behavioral health, of course, especially as a preventive measure so kids don't fall into behavioral health system, I think is an important question for us in terms of how we think about adequacy. I'll have to go back and look at 193, the 2008 definition and following, but I don't know to what extent we're really, the state is currently funding the kind of social emotional learning curriculum that seems to be an important part of children's educational experience. So I wanted to make that connection as well.
Yeah, Bruce, and you're right. You won't find that connection. And actually, the bill that I'm working on, that'll be the consolidated education bill, does have an MTSSB requirement for each district in the triage hierarchy that the Department of Education has pushed out to the implementing schools, the early implementers. So I think Kelly teed up an important idea that there's something to the school climate that contributes to the education of all students when a social emotional behavior is a part of a basic education. So the purpose accomplished there. I don't know if we quite got there with the CTE conversation, and that means meaning to the same place, that there's how to hook that into the education of each student. That's going to be a harder conversation for us, I think. But that was great. Thank you for teeing it up, Bruce.
Right, and Jay, and great meeting this afternoon. You know, we oftentimes say that you know, public education here in New Hampshire, I mean, I've said it, that we're already paying for it. It's just not the state paying for it. It's being paid for on backs of local property taxpayers. But in the case of the two areas we heard about today, it's really not being paid for. It's just not being done in the way it could be done. And so, you know, it's largely not being done at the local level, and it's not being done at the you know, through state funds either. So so these are things that I think we need to consider as you know, items that probably aren't being done the way they should be done.
Well, you know what, Dave?
And then let's bring this to a close.
Dave, just the last thing though, all the programs which Jay is referencing, just be it the school nurse, the counselor, psychologist, assessment, mental health, it's all listed under optional services. So we, the legislature, have caused this by listing these things as optional. So is it part of adequacy? No.
Chris had a comment, and then we'll bring it to a close.
Well, I think this afternoon really suggests that there are underlying values here that need to be brought forth that are related to capacity. So, you know, coming from the old approach where it's like pick one from column A, one from column B, doesn't really speak to a set of values that needs to inform how you think about what adequacy is. And it feels like that's missing from our discussion, and you can't get there from an adequacy point of view.
Chris, I agree with you. Even the concept that there's base adequacy versus differential adequacy, we're down a rabbit hole. In fact, I agree with you. It's quality-based adequacy, and I think we've been constrained for too long.
And one more, you use the word quality in sometimes, because whenever people use that word quality within education, we get into another rabbit hole. So I sometimes use the word qualities, that yes, we're identifying in this conversation qualities that we think are important because they're associated with equitability and other kinds of values. And I think we need to maybe get clearer about those. So before we get into the, you know, how much does a teacher cost?
I agree.
So that
hey, take your meeting back.
Yeah. And I think the word outcomes has been used a lot by us, and outcomes-based education. I think that's come up through these two conversations. Hopefully that word resonates with some people, all of us. I'm not seeing it because it's 5 o'clock, Bruce. And
right.
It's time, and David, it's time for us to wrap up.
It's 5 o'clock somewhere.
Yeah.
Thank you all for making time, the end of your day, your end of your week. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you at 2 o'clock on Monday.
Many thanks to Eric and Kelly and Erica.
Yes. Yep, here.
Thank you very much.
Dave, let's
Thanks
email
all right.
agenda.
Enjoy the summer weekend.
Dave, we'll email draft agenda for Monday.
Sounds good.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Good weekend, everybody.